I don't really believe that one's gender identity can change through the course of life. Hard disagree. For me, it has. And also, it continues to. Because I'm like non-binary, agender, gender fluid. Like, I'm moving and shifting, you know? My gender identity differs from the sex I was assigned at birth. Oh yeah. That said, it is my opinion that everybody should be assigned non-binary at birth. Reason being, gender identity, contrary to what woke conservatives will bitch and moan about online, it's a societal construct, it's a social construct. So, until one is knowledgeable enough to understand the concept of gender, one cannot identify with a gender. I have taken steps to bring my physical body more in line with my gender identity, or am contemplating doing so in the future. Yup. Now, I don't know how agree I can do here. I'm quite happy with the fact that I have a cock and balls. Now, if I could plug and play and, you know, take them off and keep them in a case labeled old reliable for the ability to not have bulge, I would certainly do that because cucking is a pain in the dick and I don't want to do it. So I can't, like, fully agree. So I wanted to look at this thing because I thought it would be funny. I've done these before in the past, but perhaps my identity has changed, you know? And this is going to be the most scientifically rigorous testing you'll ever take when it comes to your gender identity, sexuality, and all the stuff in between. Like, there's no more rigorous testing here than IDRlabs.com, the 7 identities test. It's a dank meme, but it could be fun. So let's see what's up. It's about your 7 identities, as it were. The 7 identities test is a communally developed test to help people determine their characteristics in the new matrix of gender identities. Whereas the traditional male-female binary is held up for decades, many are now beginning to question the norms and stands that underpin the notions of classical gender conceptions. What is your gender identity according to the modern matrix of gender identities? For each of the following statements, indicate how well it describes you below. Question 1 of 35. Having a definite gender identity doesn't make sense to me. Totally agree with that. For me, I am a amoebic blob. I identify at least as non-binary because I think the term is cuter and the flag is nicer. But I'm essentially agender and also omnigender, multigender. I'm every gender and none at once because I am a gender abolitionist. I think the whole thing is a fuck and we should probably move past it in the long term. Like, for now, we got it and we got to be engaging with it in the most healthy ways possible that help and hurt the least amount of people possible. Help the most and hurt the least, I should say. But in the long term, I won't be alive to see it. And perhaps even generations past me won't be alive to see it. But eventually, I believe we'll get there. A post-gender world where the social concept of gender doesn't really have the stranglehold that it has on people that it currently does, you know? That's the idea. So having a definitive gender identity, it doesn't make sense to me at all because the idea is dumb. Now, I should say, I think even if you progress past having a gender like system in like a post-gender future, I feel like you're still going to have things kind of similar to it that are representative of you and help you identify a variety of parts of you, like being more masculine or feminine or androgynous and stuff like that. It's mostly just like getting past like the strict adherence to gender that society currently has because it hurts a lot of people and that's cringe. It's hard to conceive of something like that because the entirety of your life and the lives of your parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and great have all been dominated by gender. And of course, like, the stereotypes for the genders are like move around and shift and change shape over time. You know, pink used to be a boy's color, now blue is the boy's color, you know? But, you know, I think moving past it would be helpful. Medical professionals have tried to talk to me into removing certain ambiguous traits I have or have had because they wanted me to appear more like a traditional man or woman. This is the intersex question, I'm pretty sure. This is an intersex-related question. I've never had this happen. I've been poor my whole life, so because I live in America, I haven't had a lot of experience in the medical healthcare system, much less talking about my gender identity or sexuality. That's a very more recent thing for me. So I've never had this experience. My understanding would be if you were intersex and you were born with whatever traits that would be relevant to how being intersex affects you, it would start to come in. So, like, for instance, a person who is intersex, who is trying to identify as, you know, a woman in society, there are going to be a couple traits that are more stereotypically, on the men's side of things. And doctors would be like, oh, well, there are certain things you can do to mitigate those things and look more like what you're trying to present as in society, which would be a woman. Now, the unfortunate thing about that is that usually these choices are made by the parents to very young children who have literally no say or consent in the matter, which is very cringe. Like, if right-wingers are so mad about so-called genital mutilation or whatever, you'd probably want to be mad at the fact that intersex kids have a variety of operations done to them to make them look more or appear more as man or woman, male or female, even though they are intersex definitionally, they're kind of in the middle of the bimodal spectrum of biological sex. And it, as far as I'm aware, it's not really beneficial and tends to have negative ramifications in the future. But yeah. There's a bunch of other stuff that we reacted to an Anthony Padilla video where he talked to intersex people. There's a whole lot more in there if you want to see that. I've never had this. Number 3, I don't really believe that one's gender identity can change through the course of life. Hard disagree. For me, it has. And also, it continues to. Because I'm like non-binary, agender, gender fluid. Like I'm moving and shifting, Sometimes I feel like I want to be presenting more as a woman or as a feminine person. Sometimes I am feeling like I want to present more like a masculine person and seen in society more as like a man. It all changes. Because in my ideal world, like if I had the ability to do whatever I want as it pertains to my gender identity and my biological sex, I'd be able to like hot swap between androgyny and like very masculine and very feminine. Like I'd be able to do it all if I could. I can't, obviously, but like I would love to be, if I felt like it, like a super masculine guy or like a super masculine woman or like a super feminine guy or a super feminine woman, or a very androgynous. Like I would like to be able to do those extremes and also everything in between, but I can't, unfortunately. But I have those feelings a lot. Like, it would be cool if I could be, like, a super buff, or not, like, buff, but, like, super, like, masculine, stereotypically kind of person, and sometimes want to be very feminine. So, there's no way I could ever not disagree. We were making emotes. I could never not disagree with this statement. Number 4, I rarely express my gender identity in ways that highlight the gender stereotypes in our society. Wait, what do they mean by that? Highlight the gender stereotype. I feel like you could read this 2 ways, but maybe I'm just stupid. So would that mean like, oh, I rarely express my gender identity in stereotypical ways as it pertains to the gender identity I'm trying to identify as or present as? Or is it saying that I rarely express my gender identity in ways so as to highlight gender stereotypes, meaning that I would present in such a way to make people think about the stereotypes in our society and if they should even, be there or whatever. You know what I mean? I feel like there's 2 ways to read that, and I might just be stupid. I interpreted it as being stereotypical, but I'm not so sure. I feel like the highlight part is what I'm confused about. Because if it's saying literally like, oh, I rarely express my gender identity in stereotypical ways as it pertains to my gender, then it can't be that, because it highlights the gender stereotypes in our society. So that would mean that like I'm dressing in a certain way to be provocative and kind of buck the stereotypes or make people think. So I'm going to have to disagree then, right? Because like I don't do as much as other people. I have a pretty chill aesthetic, I feel like. But simply being trans and also, like, dressing, oscillating between androgynous to very femme, but like hyper femme, to kind of mask, but not like hyper mask, is kind of a way to highlight the gender stereotypes in our society, I guess. That's not why I do it, but that's what it could have the effect of. So I'm going to mediumly disagree on that one. Question number 5. I have had to correct or explain my gender identity or expression to others. Not really. I don't think I have. But that's also because I understood myself to be not cis and not heterosexual pretty late in the game, when I was like 22, 23. And I've really like come into that and understood it even more around like 24, 25, 26. I'm 27 now. And it's still a work in progress, of course. So I just haven't been in a position where I've needed to do that. Also, I'm a live streamer, so I don't go anywhere. I don't go outside. The people that I hang out with are pretty woke, as it were. They already understand this whole, oh, what are the pronouns and how to respect them, blah, 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 blah. So it's not really a thing I've ever had to do. Now, that said, There were times in the past when I was younger, like in late middle, early high school, and like throughout high school, and even like into my early 20s. During the times where I understood myself to be cisgender, there were times because I presented a bit more femininely, not as much as I do now, but I presented a bit more femininely as was typical to, being a man, right? So there were times where people would mistake me for being a woman or whatever. It was incredibly rare, but because I wore my hair longer and all this kind of stuff, it did happen. But I never really, at any times that would happen, felt the need to correct anybody. And I guess, that's potential flag to what would occur in the future, foreshadowing. So I'm going to have to hard disagree on this, unfortunately. Well, I don't think it's a hard disagree. I feel like if you were cis and you conform to the expectations of your gender identity, you wouldn't ever have to do this. So that would be a hard disagree. So I wonder if like a light disagree, because like there is a potential for me to have to do that in the future. For sure. Especially as my medical transition progresses when it comes to my HRT shit. And potential like forays into different ways of dressing. Or even behaving, who knows. So I feel like a light disagree makes the most sense here. Even given all that I've already said. Well, I guess it could be neutral as well. Because like, if I was to agree to this at any capacity, that means it would have had to have happened a couple times. And it really hasn't, but that's because of the caveats that I've made. I'm going to make it neutral. Question 6 of 35. I truly cherish the fact that I am able to present myself as a traditional man or woman. Now, this is an interesting question because if you are like a trans woman and you are attempting to present yourself as a traditional woman, even though like you're a trans woman, so by traditional would refer to, we're talking about cis women. But like if you were like a trans woman who's trying to pass very hard, you would cherish the fact that you'd be able to do that, right? But this could also be if you're like a cis person interpreting this question. You would just essentially be doing that by default, and you would like also cherish that you'd be able to do that. Because like maybe you would think that if you were trans, it might be more difficult for you, so you're like happy that you're able to do it by default. You know what I mean? That's interesting. I'm gonna have to say hard disagree because I'm not trying to be traditional anything, and I'm not trying to conform to any stereotypes whatsoever. I'm trying to be an amoebic blob of gender and no gender, so. The sex I was assigned at birth truly matches and reflects how I perceive my gender identity. Not even close, brother man, and I don't really think I need to explain that at all. Well, actually, wait. Sorry. The sex I was assigned at birth truly matches and reflects how I perceive my gender identity. Not really, but I don't know if it's as hard of a disagree. Because being male, there are a variety of aspects of that, and even the puberty that I went through as it pertains to my biological sex, there are aspects of it that I enjoy. Like the fact that I have a deeper voice, the fact that I have a cock and balls, and all this kind of stuff, you know? Like, there are a variety of aspects of being AMAB that I do enjoy. So I don't think it's going to be a hard disagree. It's going to be a medium disagree. Mostly because if I was to choose it myself, and it was possible to do so, I would have my biological sex be as both as possible, you know what I mean? But, like, a lot of this shit is fucking convoluted. I use my gender expression to go beyond the limits of what traditional society considers acceptable. Yeah. Now, I don't do it super hard, so I don't think I'm super hard to agree, because I don't go for the hyper-femme or hyper-mask shit. I'm not opposed to the hyper-femme stuff. I just feel like I would have to do makeup to achieve that a little bit better, and I only do eyeliner, so I'm gonna go to this. Medium agree. At the end of the day, I just know deep down that I am more male than female, or more female than male. Hard disagree, brother. I don't identify with any of that shit. I'm trying to be all and none. Quantum gender superposition. Put slight because I lean a little one way. I'm gonna keep hard disagree. Number 10. Medical professionals have at some point told me or my caregivers that I should consider genital surgery so that I could live a, quote, normal life. That's an intersex question if I ever saw one. I have not. There are multiple ways in which I express my gender identity rather than just the traditional male or female. Hard agree. I express my gender in ways outside the norm of any traditional gender identity. I feel like I'm a slight agree there. Because if we think about the way that I express my gender, there are times where I'm pretty feminine, and there are times where I'm relatively androgynous, and there are times where I'm leaning a bit more masc. But I'm definitely in the femme side of the spectrum. So outside of the norm of any traditional gender identity. So, for me, I have a deeper voice, I have a more masculine personality and way of carrying myself, but in terms of, my aesthetics, I've got some masculine, a fair amount of feminine. I feel like it would be hard to agree to this question, even, the most gender-fucked person possible, unless you're literally, doing it all. But I guess it's traditional gender identity. I think this is a weird question. How about medium agree? I have rarely, if ever, felt that people were incorrectly assuming my pronouns. Because I use any of them, I'm gonna have to agree to this one. The degree to which I'm not sure. The thing is, like, there'll be times, so like, even for somebody like me who like doesn't give a shit about their gender identity, there will be times where like I can tell there are people that perceive me a certain way. Either like, oh yeah, that right there, that's a man, or that right there, there are times where I can like kind of sense that. But like if I was like a binary trans person, that I would be able to feel that a lot more, I'm pretty sure. But because I don't give a shit, it's hard to like really identify that. Because essentially what happens when people assume my pronouns, they look at me and they might assume he, him first. I feel like that's usually going to be the case. Maybe I'm just coping. I don't know that people would look at me and say she, her, but I guess it depends on like what I'm wearing and all that. But as soon as I start talking, it's he, him immediately. Because I just have a deeper voice and the way that I talk is more masculine. So as soon as I open my mouth, it's he, him. But like that doesn't bother me. So I'm gonna medium agree here. Which is funny too, because if I'm in the agree section here, that puts me closer to cis. But the thing about that is it can also put you closer to like gender fluid or like agender, right? Because like if you're a cis person reading this question, I have rarely, if ever, felt that people were incorrectly assuming my pronouns. So assuming the cis person isn't gender nonconforming, they would hard agree to that, right? But if you're agender and you don't care about how people refer to you when it comes to your gender identity, then you would also agree. Why multiple axes are needed for gender? Yeah, it's funny. Because, like, I am very far from cisgender, but there is still a similarity there, which is funny. At least for this test. I express my gender identity in a way that challenges or expands people's conceptions of gender. I kind of do by default, I guess, but, like, that's not really my intention. Like, it'll be on the back of my mind sometimes. It's like, oh, what can I do to, like, challenge people's conceptions of gender? But that's not usually what I'm doing. I just dress the way I like to dress because I like it and I think it looks decent. That's really it. There's not really a lot of intentionality behind doing that. Like, if I feel like that was, like, a thing that I really wanted to do, I would hard agree to this. But because it's not a thing that I think about too much, but I still do it just because I dress in a gender nonconforming way, at least as, the assumptions would be when it pertains to my biological sex. So I guess I'll medium agree. Seem to recall you saying you like confusing people sometimes. Yeah, no, it is fun. It is fun to do that. And there'll be a bunch of people that'll be in my comments or DMs being like, holy shit, I thought I was straight. And then I saw you and wow, wee. Or like there'll be people who are like, oh my god, I thought you were a girl. Like people come in here, like usually dumbass right-wingers will come up in here and be like, oh my god, I thought you were a girl. But now I hear your voice and now I'm going to be transphobic. Lamau. Essentially saying, I thought you were attractive and thought you were a woman that I was attracted to, but then I realized that you were not. At least that's my assumption based on your voice and mannerisms, so now I'm going to be transphobic because I am an NPC. So, like, that does happen too, and I do find that fun. But I don't think hard agree, because that would mean I would have to be very intentional about it. But that is a good point. It often seems to me as if people are oddly insistent on gendering everything, whereas I don't see the world as gendered the way they do. So, in an abstract sense, like in a conceptual sense, I would like hard agree to this because I'm a gender abolitionist. However, because I live in a society and I was born and molded in a society that is incredibly gendered, especially growing up in a very conservative area, it's like kind of been baked into me and I've had to unlearn it actively throughout my life to see the world very gendered. And there are a variety of like small things that you could like refer to as gendering everything that I might do just because I think it's fun or funny. Like calling inanimate objects he or she, or referring to animals with he or she without knowledge of what they are. Like the meme of like all dogs are boys and all cats are girls, that kind of shit, which I don't actually agree with. There are vibes and aesthetics involved for me to where I'll he, him, or she, her an animal. But I do that as well. But like because of my upbringing and because of the way that our society is formatted when it comes to gendering everything, there is a bit of that still lingers. I don't know. I don't see the world as gendered the way they do. I guess I could hard agree to that, because the way they do is the big part of this question here. Because I do see the world as gendered because of everything I've just said, just not the way the average person is going to. I'll hard agree to it. I explore my gender identity in ways that more traditionally minded people haven't even considered. Oh, absolutely. I am biohacking my hormonal system, my endocrine system, currently, as we speak. which is not even close to something anybody who is more traditionally minded would have considered. Now, there are going to be more traditionally minded people that might do something like that, like older men who go on TRT, testosterone replacement therapy, like Joe Rogan, to maintain muscle mass and make up for any deficits of testosterone that they might experience as they age. Same for women, especially postmenopausal women who get on estrogen. And like there's a variety of like aesthetic procedures that people will have to make them look more in line with their gender identity in ways that they would wish to. So there is going to be a little bit more there, even for like your average person. But I still think those things are fairly rare. So like maybe not average person, but like traditionally minded person, I guess. But like I am a hard agree on this one. My gender identity changes over time. Hard agree. Already talked about that. I use my style, behavior, and mannerisms to live as the opposite gender of the one I was assigned at birth, and doing so feels right to me. Probably a medium agree for that, because like I'm not like a binary trans person, and I'm gender fluid and I move around it. So like I'm not a binary trans person, so I can't hard agree to that. So I'm gonna be around here somewhere. Because really, it's just my style. My behavior and mannerisms are fairly masculine, but my style, my physical aesthetic, aren't as much depending on, the context. So I feel like medium or light agree is going to apply here. So I'll medium agree to that. How much has HRT improved your life? Pretty substantially. So for me, I'm not a binary trans person. I'm like a gender fucked amoebic blob. But the physical changes that have been rendered from being on feminizing HRT have been pretty poggers. But it's probably not as monumental for me as it would be a binary trans person, if that makes sense. And also, genetically speaking, I've kind of been gifted in some ways, in that both of my parents are short, so am I. I've got a smaller frame. I'm not very hairy, and never was, even though my dad is. For whatever reason, I've never been super hairy, luckily. My fat distribution has always been, like, more feminine, even, like, before HRT. So, like, there's a whole bunch of that shit that I already enjoyed the benefits of, or at least after I understood myself to be gender nonconforming and all this kind of shit. Because before, when I thought I was cisgender, it was actually a negative, a lot of those things. Like, I would be looking at my arms when I was a lot younger, like, just going through puberty, like, okay, when the fuck's the dark hair gonna come in? Or, like, when am I gonna be able to grow facial hair? Or, like, being super short, this kind of sucks because I'm not really taken seriously as a man in society, in, like, general interpersonal relationships and also romantic ones, and all this kind of stuff. Now, that's a benefit for me, but before, it wasn't. Like, I've experienced both of those sides of the spectrum. Now I'm essentially just playing to my strength. Speaking of short, I lost about an inch of height or more on HRT. Apparently that's the case for me too. I've been measured at the doctor before HRT, and I was like 5'5", apparently. I don't know if this is like a difference of the person who is looking at the fucking height thing, but now I'm 5'4", apparently. And like fat distribution shit can change that, which is interesting. Like, I feel like I've went down like a shoe size, or like half a shoe size as well. Because like the shoes that were previously a fairly decent fit feel a little bit looser nowadays. And like I'm fucking 27. I went through like the entirety, the full rigor of the AMAB puberty that I was supposed to have, apparently. It's possible that I have like something going on, like a sensitivity to estrogen, to where the amount of estrogen I had before, which was not exceptionally high when I got tested before HRT, I was in the middle of the standard range for testosterone, and my estrogen was like normal for an AMAB person before HRT. So it's possible that like a little goes a long way for me when it comes to HRT before that. Because even now, it's been weird trying to moderate my dosages for my estrogen injections, because it seems like what would be a normal dose for somebody else is too much for me. So it's possible that like my body is a bit more sensitive than usual to estrogen. I'm not too sure. But like I'm 27 now and I started HRT at like 26. So any like skeletal changes that would have happened on HRT can't, at least not generally speaking, have happened. So it has to be all fat distribution. That would be those changes. The gender identity that it feels normal for me to express changes vividly from one month to the next. Kind of, yeah. There are times where like I'm feeling like in both physical aesthetic, mannerisms, and stuff like that. There are times where like in physical aesthetic as well as mannerisms, behavior, and all this kind of shit, I will feel like I want to be more feminine. And there will be times where I feel like I want to be more masculine. And there are times where like I'm neutral on the idea, like I'm just chilling, which usually keeps me around the more androgynous side of things. Like recently, the past like month or two or three, I haven't really cared to dress up like hyper femme, at least for me. What to constitute hyper femme from outfits you've seen me in. That said, I've never really felt an inclination to behave in a more feminine way or like talk in a more feminine way. So for me, that is all my physical aesthetic. That said, if I was like having romantic or sexual relationships, it would probably be a lot more easy for me to figure that shit out. But because I've been celibate for like the last almost decade of my life, it's not as easy to diagnose that in myself, to like see that outside of like if I was having external influences when it comes to that, if that makes any sense. I'm not sure what level of agreement I should go for here. I think a medium agree is good because it's usually not like massive changes between. It's usually just like a sliding scale, like in certain parameters. And like it's never the case that I go like full on hypermasculine ever because I don't want to do that. At least I would like to be able to if I could like literally change the form of my body at will and then go back to what I am now. But I can't do that. So in the current canvas that I have, being hypermasc isn't really for me. So I think medium agree is good here. My internal sense of gender changes just as my mood changes. I guess it depends on how you interpret that question. So are they saying, like, as flippantly as one's mood might change? Or are they literally saying, like, my gender expression or my sense of gender is like a mood ring? You know what I mean? Where, like, if I'm more upset, I'll want to present a certain way. And if I'm happier, I'll want to present a certain way or whatever. So there's, like, two ways you could interpret this question. Because, so, yeah, I guess my question is, does it mean, like, my gender expression or my internal sense of gender is directly correlated with my mood and it can change with it? Or is it saying, like, my gender changes as easily or flippantly as my mood might change? It also depends on how emotional of a person you are, how you could interpret this question. Like, if you're a stoic person and, like, your mood very rarely shifts, then you would interpret this question in a different way. It's going to have to be light or medium agree. Do a medium agree. I have reproductive or sexual anatomy that does not fit in your the typical definitions of male or female. Yes to the previous question, no to the current question. Because I'm not intersex. That said, the changes that can be made to your sexual and reproductive anatomy from HRT, either being on testosterone and suppressing estrogen or the inverse, can change and make it not fit typical definitions of male or female. So I don't think I can hard disagree for that. I'm not sure if HRT applies to question 21. Well, surely it must, right? Because if I look at it face value, this question, I have reproductive or sexual anatomy that does not fit typical definitions of male or female. Well, I have breasts. Now, they're not very large, and I hope they don't get very large. But, like, I have them. So, like, I feel like I have to interpret this question this way. Like, without upkeep, feminizing HRT can shrink your dick. That can't happen. But it's very easy to circumvent. Usually just by masturbating or whatever. Also, like, there are, like, people who take, like, certain drugs that people who experience erectile dysfunction might take. Not, like, Viagra, the ones that are supposed to be, like, you take this pill and then you're able to get erect and maintain an erection. But rather ones that are, like, more subtle, where, like, it allows you to have spontaneous erections more easily throughout time. There are people that'll do that to be able to maintain it. Because, like, spontaneous erections are a thing that happen to people with penises that are, you know, having hormone levels typical to their gender assigned at birth and their biological sex. And you do lose out on that, generally speaking, with feminizing HRT. But, like, there are things you could do to make up for it. And one of those things would be either regularly doing maintenance, as it were, or taking said medication. Anyway, there's a variety of things that HRT could do that could make you even, like, agree to this question. So I think light agree, not disagree. I think light agree is actually true. Many people have been confused or surprised by the sight of my unclothed body. Well, nobody has really seen it recently. So, that said, I feel like I'm neutral here. Or maybe, like, light disagree. Because I haven't had any experiences post-HRT. And even pre-HRT, you know, I've been celibate for a while. But before that, when I was more sexually active, the fact that I am, like, very short, small build, massive hog, hairless, there's, like, a bit of surprise. I don't know about confusion, but surprise involved, I can imagine. I feel like I remember hearing. So it's not going to be, like, a hard disagree. And if I think about, like, into the future, I'm T for T because I'm based. So at least that's my preference. So I don't think they would be confused or surprised in, like, the way that you would expect. If I was, like, getting with cis people who were not knowledgeable on trans issues at all, like things related to transgender, you know, then yeah, they might be surprised. But I would be selecting for people that are knowledgeable, so it's not likely to happen. I feel like I'm thinking about these questions harder than I should. I'm gonna be neutral. I have experienced discrimination or violence because of my gender identity. I have, yeah, but that was even before I understood my gender identity to differ from what was assigned at birth. And that's because I was more feminine, even when I was younger. When I was in middle school, high school, I wore my hair longer, all this kind of stuff. I didn't dress, like, very femininely, mostly because I didn't know how to ask my parents for clothes to that effect. Like, I remember there was a time where I wanted to wear skinny jeans because I thought it'd be cool. But I didn't really want to ask my parents about that because I was worried that they might think I was a fucking queer. But then, later on in my life, I end up getting them. And my dad tells me I look good in them. So, like, turns out I don't think he would have cared too much. But that was just, like, a vibe that I got, I guess. Because, like, my parents are more socially conservative. Because, like I say, I grew up in a conservative area. I have a Latino immigrant father. He's cool now, though. Because I'm an adult. But, like, it's clear to me that he would have wanted me to be, like, more masculine. And all this kind of shit. But, such is life. Still a really, really nice dad, though. And generally a cool guy. But, like, when I've been bullied for combing my hair in school before and all this kind of shit. So, like, this doesn't really happen to me nowadays, but that's mostly because I don't do it much. Like, I work online at home. I don't go out a lot, and when I do, it's with people who aren't going to be ignorant about a variety of things related to the transgenders. And I also live in a more progressive area, so that's less likely to happen, though not impossible, of course. Living in Seattle. So I'm a light disagree. I often feel like I have no gender at all. Absolutely. Fuck that shit. Cringe. The body I was born with mashed the notions of what one would expect of a traditional man or woman. So this is another intersex question, right? I don't believe I'm intersex. Like I said, I might have, like, a sensitivity to estrogen. I'm not sure about that, but it seems likely to me. And it's what you're born with as well, right? So, like, it doesn't mean, like, oh, later in life, you hit puberty, and, like, I don't grow a lot of body hair, facial hair, all this kind of shit. It's not talking about that. It's talking about literally at birth. So I don't have to hard agree on that. My gender identity doesn't fit the traditional categories of man or woman, male or female. Oh, yeah. I challenge the traditional notions of what it means to be masculine or feminine almost every day. Simply by existing? Sure. Intentionally? Not really. Also, I don't go out very often into society because I work from home and I'm a hermit. So, I don't have a lot of opportunity to challenge the traditional notions. So, like, simply by existing, and I guess having an online presence. I kind of do. My gender identity differs from the sex I was assigned at birth. Oh, yeah. That said, it is my opinion that everybody should be assigned non-binary at birth. Reason being, gender identity, contrary to what woke conservatives will bitch and moan about online, it's a societal construct, it's a social construct. So, until one is knowledgeable enough to understand the concept of gender, one cannot identify with a gender. So a child cannot possibly identify with a gender until they are at a point in their intelligence that they can understand what gender identity is, how it works in society, and all that kind of stuff. So it is my opinion that people should all be assigned non-binary at birth. And then they figure out through their years, through education, through their experiences, where they fall in the gender spectrum. The majority of the time, that's likely going to be resulting in cisgender people. Well, I guess you wouldn't really be cis anymore, because you wouldn't be assigned to gender. Cis people would become non-binary people, actually. Because to be cis simply means you identify with the gender you were assigned at birth. So if you're assigned non-binary at birth and then you're non-binary, well, that means you're cis. But most people would go along with the societal expectation for their gender identity as it pertains to their biological sex, right? So a person who is assigned male at birth for their biological sex, or I guess a person who is biologically sexed as male, would likely go on to identify as a man. Because that just seems to be the way the stats bear out. And also, I should say, that doesn't mean if you're a parent, you, like, don't buy any gendered, like, toys or articles of clothing for your kids. The idea would be that when they're, like, too young to be able to make a choice, you just have, like, a couple options. Like, you have some pink clothes, you have some blue clothes, you have some colors that are more ambiguous, like purple or yellow. You know what I mean? And then throughout the kid's life, you give them options when they are able to, like, gravitate more toward one thing or another with more intention, like what toys they want to play with, if they happen to want to play with dolls or G.I. Joe, or if they want to wear dresses or pants or blah, blah, all that kind of shit. And throughout their life, you let them essentially, with guidance, chart their own course for what, like, they want to, like, what activities they want to participate, if they want to be in, like, sports, or if they want to get into, like, cosmetology or whatever, this kind of thing. It's not like you only buy your kids gray clothes and building blocks. No, funnily enough, building blocks are seen as a boys thing. Anyway, I have taken steps to bring my physical body more in line with my gender identity, or am contemplating doing so in the future. Yup. Now, I don't know how agree I can do here. I have intentions for, like, a brow lift, for instance, which is a bit more investment than simply getting on HRT. But I also don't have any intentions for, like, any genital surgeries, I'm quite happy with the fact that I have a cock and balls. Now, if I could plug and play and, take them off and keep them in a case labeled all reliable for the ability to not have bulge, I would certainly do that, because tucking is a pain in the dick and I don't want to do it. So I can't, like, fully agree, because I'm not, like, turbo binary trans person. I am a trans woman. I want to do all this shit. And also, there are trans women out there that don't want to do that. But you know what I mean. But I am on HRT. I do want to do some, cosmetic surgeries for my face. Also, like, body hair removal. Because while I don't have a lot of visible body hair, it is still there. It's sparse and not very dark. But I would like to get rid of it, especially on my legs, so I don't have to, deal with it. That would be cool. But I'm lazy about that. And also not the best candidate, because my hair is not super dark and I have lighter skin. The best candidates for laser hair removal, unfortunately, because of how light works, are people with fair skin and dark hair. There are other ways, though, like electrolysis, but that's really difficult to do on your fucking legs, because that's a really big surface area, and electrolysis is literally follicle by follicle. It would take a lot of time, a lot of sessions, a lot of pain. There's also epilators or whatever. Next. Throughout my life, I have always known that there was one gender identity that was more right for me than the others. The word known here is the pivotal one. I'm a hard disagree on that. Thing is, though, there's a bit of nuance there. I thought I was cis for a while, because I was not aware that being trans was a thing you could do, because I grew up in a conservative area. It was not taught in school, all this kind of stuff. So if I had the knowledge at an earlier age, I would have understood myself to be trans and gender nonconforming at an earlier age. And also, if I didn't think there would be a lot of societal pushback for being so also, it would be more likely. Which is why conservatives want to make sure there's still a stigma there, make sure the society we live in is still hostile to gender nonconforming and trans people, and also not have this knowledge available to people, why they're into book burning. So I can't say I've always known that there was one gender identity out there that was more right for me than the other. And I also can't say that I've always known that that wasn't the case, because there was a time where I thought I was cis. So there was a period of time in my life where I thought I knew, but I was wrong. So that's the nuance. But that's a hard disagree now, for sure. Well, can I hard disagree that, if that's the case? I'm trying to be nuanced here. Because, like, is the absence of knowledge, how much does that weigh on the disagree scale? Because, like, if we're talking about my actual experiences versus knowing what I know now, what would have been the case if I knew then? I'm a hard disagree. Even as a child, I felt my gender identity did not match the sex I was assigned at birth. No. Unfortunately not. Now, like I say, if I had the knowledge I do now, it's likely that that would have been the case. But, like, if I could do my life over, I don't know that if I would have wanted to not go through a male puberty. But that's because I want to be able to have my cake and eat it too. I want to be able to mix and match. Because, like, absent a male puberty, my gear wouldn't develop the same way if I went through, like, a female puberty with HRT. And I wouldn't want that to be the case. But I also wouldn't have wanted a variety of things that male puberty did give me. Which is why I'm into, transhumanism. Related concepts for me. So this was just an absence of knowledge. Oh yeah, the mental and emotional changes that a male puberty gives you, I'm not a big fan of. But a lot of that is also societal. A lot of that is also the way we teach people. Like, you can go through a male puberty, and sure, testosterone will make you less likely to cry and have really strong emotions, blah, 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 blah. But, like, you can teach people how to be emotionally intelligent. You can teach people how to interpret their own emotions and the way that the things they are doing affect other people. That is a thing you can teach, but we don't do it very well in society, especially not for young boys and men. So it just doesn't help. Now, there were times where, like, I was curious about potentially wearing more feminine things. Like, I wore my hair longer, etc., etc. So I can't hard disagree, because a lot of that is lack of knowledge, and there are some things that I can notice. But because, like I say, I'm not like a binary trans person, And because my gender is a fucking blob, it's not going to be easy for me to recognize it even with the knowledge, I don't think. Or, you know what I mean. I'm kind of tired right now, but I think you know what I mean. This is somewhat disagree. Deep down, I often wish to myself that my body was not gendered. Oh, yeah. I guess it depends. This is a very interpretable question in a variety of ways. What does that mean? I guess if my ultimate goal would be to mix and match and, like, change at will, then I have to hard agree here. Because that would make my body not gendered if I could literally change it at will. I have not felt the need to give a lot of thought to my gender identity. I'm in the disagree column. Because I have felt the need to give a lot of thought to my gender identity. And I do give a lot of thought to it. The thing is, I might not give as much thought as others, once again, because I am an amoebic blob of gender and no gender. So I'm going to medium disagree. My gender identity matches the sex I was assigned at birth. Nope. I often feel it's hard to identify with any internal identity. I'm in the agree column here, but to what extent? Well, if I'm all genders and none at once, I feel like that has to be a hard agree. Pinish. What are we giving? Holy fuck, how am I 100% non-binary? God, I am the most non-binary person out there. What the fuck? I am the non-binary person. That's not actually true. That's like Dorian Electra. So I'm 43% cis. And the funny thing is, a lot of that has to do with the fact that I'm agender, if that makes any sense at all, which, like, face value, it wouldn't. But because of a lot of things I've said and the nuance that I've given to my answers, like, there were times where the answer I was giving matched being agender, but could have been a similar answer that a cis person would have made, absent the caveat. Because, like, it's a test with questions. It's not going to be as nuanced or perfect. So that's why I'm getting a bit of cisgender. But there are also, like I say, there are things that I like about my biological sex and the puberty I got from it. And there are things that I still like to identify with as it pertains to my biological sex, and then the gender identity, which would be associated with that, which would be like being a man or whatever. There are certain things that I like about it as well. So that's why a lot of this is coming. Is there a link to the test yet? You definitely agender? That's true. I'm at least one of them. 93% gender fluid. I wonder what I've had to have done to get 100%. 100% non-binary. Non-binary icon. 76% trans, which essentially means I'm cis. 83% gender queer. Hell yeah. 23% intersex. This is interesting. And this is also illustrative, at least with this, stinky test, that intersex people and trans people, especially people who are medically transitioning, have a fair amount in common. No way. It's not one-to-one. I mean, some things might be, but a lot of what intersex people go through is not one-to-one. But you are a type of intersex when you start getting on HRT and having whatever surgeries, You're just not born that way, necessarily, because, like, to do a lot of that, or to constitute being intersex in a lot of those ways, requires taking HRT and whatever surgeries and whatever. Especially the HRT part, I think. And 100% agender. Hell yeah. This is what we like to see. 100% non-binary and agender. Feels good, man. I put a lot of thought into my answers as well. At least I like to think I did. Because I took this test on the toiler when I saw it come up on my Twitter feed, and I answered the questions a lot more quickly, and I got somewhat different answers. I wish I saved it at the time, but I don't think I'd be able to find them. But the levels were not the same here. So it's cool to see. So putting a lot more thought into it this time, instead of just answering it while I'm taking a shit, definitely has given me probably more accurate results. You were tied between multiple identities, because I am ballin'. And now I gotta post it on Twitter. Anyway, feel free to take the test yourself and put your results or whatever you found interesting about your results in the comments if you would like. Have a good one. And you're gay. Unless you're not. But you probably are.